Hello everyone, welcome back to another video with On Point Politics, and today I'm going to be looking at my latest forecast according to my election model for the 2024 presidential election. Make sure to like the video, subscribe if you're new, and make sure to drop a comment down below. And so, just to give you guys a little bit of a recap, Joe Biden won the last election by, just 43,000 votes between Wisconsin, Georgia, and Arizona. If you combine his vote total victories, he won by around 43,000 votes, and he won the popular vote by 4.5 points, and he barely even made it across the finish line in 3 swing states. 2 of them have, Republican DNA per se. They have only recently become swing states. And so if you look at the polling aggregate, he is doing extremely bad. If you look at the polling aggregate, Trump's ahead by 1.4 percentage points as of right now in the national aggregate. Emerson College just dropped a new poll with Donald Trump and Biden tied in a two-way race, and in the new, basically the third party candidate, poll, Trump's ahead by 5 in the popular vote, which is a huge victory for him in the electoral college. That'd be a huge victory for him in the electoral college in the popular vote. And what's funny, if you notice, is that Biden's percentage in a lot of these third party matchups basically align with his approval rating. A lot of the times these polls align with his approval rating when you include all of the candidates. You can see that. And what's actually quite interesting is the registered voter polls actually have Trump doing better than likely voter samples, which is pretty interesting. That basically means that the electorate is shifting and is becoming more of a MAGA electorate. Basically, the electorate you could get on election day could be a very, populist, make America first great again type of electorate if the people who are not likely to turn out would actually vote more Republican on the national level. And so basically looking at that, we see that Donald Trump is ahead in the aggregate by 1.8% according to RCP. He's ahead 6.3% from the national popular vote. The last election, Biden's approval rating is minus 16.2, and he is ahead around 3.2 percentage points in favorability on Biden. And this gives us our final results according to my election model, which I will link in the description down below for you guys to go check out. However, for now, we're going to be going through the results. And so for the safe Republican states, you have Utah, Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, the Dakotas, Nebraska at large, as well as the 1st and 3rd congressional districts. You have Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Missouri, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, West Virginia, South Carolina, and we are adding Alaska and Maine's 2nd congressional district in that safe Republican column, giving Donald Trump 126 safe electoral votes. However, we have not actually finished. Conventional wisdom would tell you that the election's going to be close. However, because of the huge national shift, according to my model, we actually see Donald Trump is ahead by 5.8 percentage points in the polling data. And what's actually quite interesting is that I expect a worse polling error than even 2020. And so that would kind of line up, if you applied a 3.5 point polling error to this aggregate, which is the standard margin of error, you could see the popular vote get up to 4.4%, which wouldn't be that out of range from my current popular vote that is forecasted, which basically each day has their margin. The percentages figured out, and then basically all the votes are added up. So Donald Trump's projected at 75 million votes. Joe Biden's projected at 66 million votes as of right now. And we can see that Donald Trump would actually win Iowa and Ohio by safe margins. These states are, likely states, and you basically trended Republican for the past few cycles, and they've become almost solidly Republican states at this point, even more than a state like Texas, for example. And so if you look at the model actually has Trump winning Iowa by 19.3 percentage points and has him winning Ohio by 20 points. So this cycle, Ohio would actually be voting to the right of Iowa, which is pretty interesting. You could say that the whole, train disaster in East Palestine, I believe it is, in Ohio, that really caused a bit of a problem there. And so that may be fluctuating the margin to be slightly bigger. That might be affected by the polling there. However, if we look at Texas, we can see that it was only a 5.6 percentage point victory, but possibly due to the border crisis, we see that the model is projecting the state at a 16.4 percentage point victory. If we go back, a couple of elections, it has not voted this Republican since Romney in 2012 when he won it by 15.8 percentage points. And so this is that would be a humongous victory, especially for MAGA Republicans. This would be a big win. You've seen more of the neocon types do really well in the state. However, with Biden being extremely unpopular, the border crisis really affecting voters nationwide, especially ones on the southern border, which is going to affect states like Nevada, Arizona, and Texas, as well as New Mexico. You're seeing a huge shift there. And if we look at the state of Florida, Donald Trump only won that state by 3.4%. And now, DeSantis won big in his reelection, and we could clearly see there was some big trends there. And Florida is projected at a 16.6 percentage point victory. Donald Trump would essentially flip Miami-Dade. He'd flip West Palm Beach County. He'd flip Pinellas. He'd flip Duval at that point. Like, he would have a major win in the electoral college if he were to get, a 16-point victory. He would be winning almost every single county in the state of Florida. And so that gives Donald Trump 219 electoral college votes as of right now. For the safe Democratic states, you have California, Hawaii. Hawaii and California are going to get closer, but they still vote for Biden by over 15 points. You have Maryland, D.C., Massachusetts, Vermont, and the Maine's first congressional district. All of the margins do decrease from the 2020 presidential election. And you're going to see those are the only safe states. And that's a big contrast from here, where Illinois, Oregon, Washington, all of the Northeast, and New York were all safe states. If we actually go over the likely Democratic states, you're going to have Washington, Oregon, Colorado, Illinois, Connecticut, Delaware, Rhode Island, New Jersey, and the state of New York. And you can see that that is a humongous difference from the previous election. Joe Biden just sits at 191 electoral college votes, and all of these states were safe in the 2020 presidential election except for Colorado. If we look at Illinois, for example, the model has, Biden only winning by 7.3 percentage points. Donald Trump has gained massive support in the polling data with Hispanic, African American, and young voters, and a lot of these Dem states basically have a lot of those demographics, and so that's why you're seeing a lot of these states shift heavily to the right this election. And you see a state like Illinois, a state like New York trend to the right, ever so slightly. The forecasted projected margin for New York is 13.6 percentage points. So it doesn't necessarily trend to the right too much, but it is making a bit of a swing, and you could end up seeing a state trend to the right in like future cycles. Essentially, you did see Kathy Hochul, very unpopular governor there, barely win her re-election by 6 points. And for New York standards, that's a very low margin for a Democrat. In Illinois, you're seeing like a huge migrant crisis. Same thing in New York. A lot of the illegals are taking resources from people in these states, and that's why you're seeing the polling narrow up in a couple of these states. New Jersey, the latest poll with third-party voters, has the state, at a 5-point victory for Donald Trump. So a likely margin of victory, wouldn't be a huge surprise to me. Colorado is listed as a 6.7 percentage point victory. And what's interesting about this is that it is a very left trending state. It voted, 7 points to the right. Almost, I believe it was like 7 or 8 points to the right of the national environment. It could be even more than that in 2020. And what we could do, let me do it in my head. It is around like a 7-point difference, 8-point difference in the popular vote, voting to the left of the nation. And now it votes even more to the left of the nation, because the popular vote's 5.8, the margin of victory is 6.7. So you're seeing an even continued leftward trend, even from 2020. So I think, in terms of like Colorado, Washington, Oregon, Illinois, New York, these northeastern states, I don't really think Trump has a chance at winning any of those unless Biden basically has a medical emergency on the national stage when they'd actually debate. That'd be the only possible way I could even see those become competitive. The only one that I could realistically see him pick off as an upset is probably New Jersey. You did see the governor's race in 2021 be extremely close, only a 3-point victory for the incumbent governor there. So that may play into a factor. Now, we see Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, North Carolina all being decided by under 5 points. However, this cycle, we see that Donald Trump is projected to win Wisconsin by 9.9%, Pennsylvania by 9.3%, North Carolina at 12 points, Nevada at 10.3 percentage points, Michigan at 7.8, Georgia at 8.1, and Arizona at 7.8 percentage points, which puts all of these states in the likely Republican column. And not only that, we're actually going to see that Nebraska's second congressional district is a likely margin for the former president. He actually wins it by a little bit over 5 points. And what's actually quite interesting is that, unlike my previous projections, I have figured out something called an elasticity score for every single state. So I basically look at how, prone a state is to actually shifting, how much they, swing back and forth, or if they have really big swings, you have an elasticity score for every single state. And it basically helps the trend in certain states kind of adjust themselves, from the previous elections and whatnot. And you do see, these states voting by humongous margins for Donald Trump. However, before I had Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, I had the Rust Belt like super Republican as well as these states. So they kind of corrected themselves a bit. I think that if Trump were to win the popular vote by around 6, I think a 9-point win in Wisconsin would be a realistic scenario. I had it being like a 12-point victory before. That didn't make any sense. So I feel like they did correct themselves for the sake of this national environment. And so you do see all these states vote likely. And I guess the model picked up that Nebraska's second district has been redesigned. I guess the elasticity score on this model is really high. And so I guess that's why you are seeing the likely margin of victory in that district. And now we are left with New Mexico, Minnesota, Virginia, New Hampshire, and Maine at large. And so we'll be going from west to east for these states. New Mexico actually votes for Donald Trump in this projection. It is a 0.3 percentage point victory for Donald Trump. This state, the white suburban vote keeps the state Democrat for the most part, but Donald Trump, I believe, is going to be projected to win the Hispanic vote, not to win it, but he's going to win about 42-43% of the Hispanic vote. And so I think that this is going to give him a real shot to actually be able to pick off the state of New Mexico in this hypothetical scenario. He would win it, would be very close. It'd probably be within a couple thousand votes, but he would pick it off in the scenario. Minnesota, if we were to go to that state, 1.8 percentage point victory. And I'm going to also commentate on New Mexico as well. These margins, 10.8% in New Mexico for Biden, 7.1 in Minnesota for Biden. Like, these are huge victories. And, Donald Trump is shifting the national environment incredibly to the right this cycle. And so you do see a state like New Mexico being tilt Republican. You see a state like Minnesota be lean Republican. Like, these are not crazy margins. However, it would be crazy for Minnesota to finally flip. The state has not voted, Republican since 1972 when Nixon won the popular vote. We're going to pull it up right here, but Nixon won the popular vote effectively by around 23 percentage points, and Minnesota was only a 5-point victory. And so that is crazy to even look at. And so if we actually go back to the map, we'll see that, Donald Trump is winning in a landslide. Minnesota would be a lean margin of victory. This would be the first time the state would flip since 1972. And it would be a crazy thing to see. The polling has the state within 2 points. If you apply the previous polling error, it's literally a tilt state for Biden. And so Biden is in huge trouble in a state like Minnesota. And Virginia, if we were to go to Virginia, we see that Biden is barely ahead in Virginia. He's literally winning it by 0.8%. Not even too long ago, this state used to be solidly Republican. In the 80s, it was very Republican. In the 1990s, it was more competitive per se, but that was because Clinton was winning, elections by a lot in the popular vote. So the national environment was a little bit more Democrat. But even states like, Colorado and Virginia were like more solidly Republican. Even back then, Colorado and Virginia were more Republican because the suburbs used to be more Republican. You could see in a state like in New Hampshire, in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, you could see that the suburbs were pushing the states more Democrat, but the rural vote is what made states like Arkansas, Louisiana, Tennessee, Missouri, Iowa, Wisconsin more competitive, even Ohio. Even West Virginia was more competitive, in the scenario because the rules were not as Republican as they were today. So, in the 2000s, you've seen a huge shift, from, rural country to suburban country. That is mainly what's been shifting the past couple of years. The urban areas are actually stagnating for Democrats. And even in some cases, they're actually moving back to Republicans ever so slightly by a couple of points. And so that's what you're seeing take place in the moderate political sphere. And so Virginia, despite, Biden, losing the popular vote by 5.8 percentage points, if you were to swing from the last popular vote, this should be a 0.3 percentage point victory. But we do see the state has trended about a point, to the left based off of its margin because of the fact it's still Democrat, despite the popular vote moving to the left, or excuse me, moving to the right by the exact margin, or even more than the margin that what it was before. And so this state is going to stay ever so slightly Democratic. It's going to be an extremely close race, but as right now, Joe Biden is projected to actually win it. And if we look at the state of Maine, Joe Biden is actually predicted to win Maine by around 1.2 percentage points. This was a state that, Donald Trump came within striking distance of winning in 2016. In 2020, he lost it by almost 10. So that is pretty bad. And we can see that the, state is basically trending to the left at this point in time. And I guess the elasticity score, kind of picked up on that, and it's still lean Democrat, even in a scenario like this. It's actually Biden's only lean Democratic state as of right now. And so for the last state, we are going to see New Hampshire end up in the Republican column for Donald Trump. He wins it by 1.3%. This is a very anti, Donald Trump state, very anti-Republican state, but it is also a very anti-incumbent state, and it's a very libertarian state, very anti-war state. And so with those factors combined, I do think it is possible for this to happen. And, just to kind of prove that my model does have, some sort of accuracy and some sort of thought put into it, let's actually look at the aggregate in New Hampshire. What's actually quite interesting is that if you were to average out the latest polls, Biden would be ahead by 2.7 percentage points as of right now. And if you look at 2020, Biden was ahead here by 11.1 percentage points. And if you look at the polling error, Biden won by 7.4. So that's around a 3.7 miss in favor of Biden. And so if you were to apply that to this aggregate, if you were to apply that, Trump would actually be ahead in the state of New Hampshire by around a point or so. So these results are within range of possibility with the current aggregates in every state, even Wisconsin. What's funny about Wisconsin is that if we go to the aggregate in Wisconsin, Trump's up here by 1.6. And if we look at 2020, the aggregate was off in the state by around, basically 7.8%. So if you were to apply that, to this model, it would be a humongous disaster. The margin would actually be a 9.5 percentage point victory for Donald Trump, and my margin has it at 9.9. So just based off of 2020 polling errors in the current polling aggregates, this is what you get. And I guess my model is basically factoring in a possible polling error, and it doesn't even account for a polling error. It just looks at the results from 2016, 2020, looks at the swing in the trend, the average change in demographics. It includes, a polling average, it factors this in, but I have not applied an error to adjust for polling whatsoever. That is not what I have done in this scenario. I have not applied, a polling error adjuster as of right now. And so you do see Donald Trump winning very big this presidential election cycle based out of the current margins. And so if you guys did enjoy this video, please hit that like button. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you're new, and make sure to drop a comment down below. I will see you guys very, very soon.